phone.
Oh,
Well, it looks good so far, Bruce.
Yep, we can see you.
okay, you guys are good to go.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. I often wonder how many of my morning coffee cups are recorded on Zoom. You know, like the hearts theme today and whatever other theme it's going to be tomorrow, right? Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our DEI and Environmental Justice Committee meeting today. For the record, my name is Kelly Coates, and I am the tribal representative on the OWEB board. Dan Shively, my other co-chair, is unable to join us today. I'd like to remind everybody that this meeting is being streamed live on OWEB's YouTube channel and being recorded. And for those of you that are watching on YouTube, meeting materials are in the board and committee section of the OWEB website. Committee materials are toward the bottom of the page, and you can click on the relevant committee and have access to all the current meeting materials as well as past recordings. And now we will go around and do introductions for folks, and I will just pick somebody at random here. We'll start with Eric.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Eric Hartstein, OWEB staff, board, and legislative policy coordinator.
Okay, Courtney.
Courtney Schaff, monitoring and reporting program manager.
Stephanie.
Morning, everyone. Stephanie Page, Deputy Director.
Lisa.
Good morning, everybody. Lisa Hansen, Executive Director.
Jesse.
Good morning, everybody. Jessie Kirshner, Water and Climate Programs Coordinator.
Chris.
Good morning, folks. Chris Allen, non-voting board member representing the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Liza Jane.
Good morning, Liza Jane McAllister, representing the public at large and co-chair.
Aaron.
Good morning. My name is Aaron Curtis. I'm a non-voting representative from the Bureau of Land Management.
Bruce.
Hi, I'm Bruce Buckmaster from Astoria, a public at large board member.
And then do we want Nicole to introduce herself as well? Okay, Nicole.
Hi, sorry, my camera is off. My name is Nicole Betnardi. I'm the executive assistant at OWEB.
Thanks, everyone. Okay, let's do a quick review of the meeting agenda. So our first topic is OWEB staff will be sharing outreach efforts with new partners. We'll talk about next steps on OWEB board equity statement. We'll get an update on the draft DEI action plan, part of the governor's expectations. We'll have an update on the tribal training. We make time for public comment. And then we'll talk about topics for the next meeting, which right now include an update on outreach to new partners and continued discussion of OWEB board equity statement. Does anybody feel like we're missing anything on that agenda? Okay. I'd also like to acknowledge a couple of written public comments that we received in advance of the meeting. And these will be addressed within our meeting today. And just a quick check-in for OWEB staff. Has anyone signed up for verbal public comment today?
No, nobody has.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. All right, we'll get started with our agenda items then. First up is OWEB staff sharing outreach efforts with new partners. This is Lisa and Stephanie.
Well, thank you. Sorry, I'm like responding to budget questions at the same time. Because if you haven't seen it, our budget is scheduled for a work session today in the Ways and Means Natural Resources Subcommittee, and that is very, very good news for this point in time. So in terms of continued outreach, Stephanie met with the Shemeketa Apprentice Program, talking about workforce development during this current quarter. I think we talked about it at the board meeting, but since the last meeting, OWEB was involved with Oregon 4-H, the Voices in Action Conference that was held here in Salem, where we presented a climate-related question for the camp participants to respond to. And we shared that PowerPoint presentation with you after the last board meeting. We also were in contact with River Network in Colorado. They actually reached out to us, and they're thinking about how to do restoration work with local partners. And we're looking to Oregon for some advice and examples and experience. And I think it was Courtney and Stephanie did that meeting because I was tied up with something else that day. Both Stephanie and I attended a Farm Bill forum with Congresswoman Salinas. It was held at Shemeketa Community College. I had the opportunity to speak about our relationship in terms of OWEB restoration work with the Farm Bill during the session on conservation, and really talked about how important those Farm Bill dollars are in terms of complementing the funds, the lottery funds that we have, and how it does additional work on the ground. Stephanie and I toured a farm, and I'll let her talk about it just a little bit. It's, and I'll see if I can say this right, Anahuac Farm in Almsville. And basically it's a farm that really engages in indigenous practices with indigenous people. And actually we connected them with Lindsay on our board as well. So Steph, you want to give just a little more description than that?
Sure. Anahuac Farm is run by the organization Capaces, which is headquartered out of Woodburn, and it's a consortium of organizations that support farm workers, that support development and leadership within the Chicano Latino community in Oregon. And so the farm really focuses, as Lisa said, on promoting and connecting youth and adults, for that matter, with traditional practices in terms of growing traditional plants, harvesting methods, growing methods, food preparation methods, and ceremonies. And the farm is open to all youth. They have a connection with the Salem Kaiser School District, but the focus is on youth with indigenous roots, either here in the Pacific Northwest or in Central and South America. So the director showed us around. It was just a really cool visit. He used to be on the board of Oregon Agricultural Trust, and I think it might have been Colt who suggested we reach out to him in the first place. So yeah, but it was a wonderful place. And he just said, you know, anytime folks want to come out, we are interested in showing the farm to people and connecting with more partners. So it's a great experience.
And so the one thing that I would mention, you may say, well, why is OWEB, meeting on a farm? One of the things that they're interested in doing in this operation is restoring an oak woodland. There's also a stream that goes through that could have some additional restoration work done on it. And so this was another one of those connecting the dots and identifying some potential new opportunities. And also talking with Mr. Lara about the soil and water conservation districts and the watershed councils and how they may be of assistance to him as well. And then finally, during the forum, Farm Bill Forum, Stephanie and I met a longtime colleague of ours who had changed position and is now working at USDA FSA, Farm Services Agency, in a new pilot program around urban agriculture. And Amanda Welker is one of, I think it's like 6 people across the US that's standing up an urban agriculture program. And so we talked about the intersection of conservation and the opportunities in some of the urban settings potentially. And again, did much of that matchmaking too. Do you know soil and water conservation districts and others to help her as she's beginning that network of linking urban farms in the metro area or helping to develop urban farms in the metro area. And I think that pretty much captures the most recent round of outreach. And I'll stop there and see if you have any questions. And then we thought we might cede a little bit of time to Jessie to talk about the Environmental EJ Council and a meeting that she attended last week.
Great, thanks, Lisa. Any questions for Lisa and Stephanie before we kick it to Jessie? Liza Jane.
So many buttons. Lisa and Stephanie, how practical is it for you to expand to the eastern side of the state in your efforts?
Very
It is,
practical.
yeah, very practical. I think, there are a couple things to think about. If you have some ideas of people that we could be outreaching to, we do some of these on Zoom. Actually, most of them on Zoom. We've been fortunate, I think, in this last round that we were in person with at least four of them, which hasn't happened a lot. But if there are some more, you have more ideas, we just keep getting people fed into us through different organizations, and we are keeping an ongoing list and, sticking through it and working through. I think Stephanie and I both have hopes of being out a little bit more later this summer and into the fall. Once we get the legislative session and budget sorted out. And so it's possible that we could, link some additional meet and greets connections in that way too.
Some of my thoughts, Lisa, were because your plates are also stacked so high, if it's ever appropriate for a board member that lives in a different place, that they could make those visits and, also extend our efforts. It doesn't have to just be the two of you, possibly, if you trust us.
Of course. Well, thank you for that. And I think Bruce participated in one of the meet and greets with us earlier this spring when we met with, let me think about it, who was it?
Ecumenical Ministries.
Ecumenical Ministries. And that was like a second round with them. Then we also did an introduction to the partnership with them. So thank you for that, Liza Jane.
All right, Jessie.
Thanks, Kelly. So last week I attended a meeting of the Environmental Justice Council. So for those of you that aren't familiar with it, the EJC is established within the Office of the Governor, and it's a 13-member statewide council that advises the governor and state natural resource agencies on environmental justice issues. So they, in 2022, the Oregon legislature passed House Bill 4077, which directed some additional resources to that council and renamed it from the task force to the council. And so they actually were able to hire on a council coordinator. So that's the first position that they've ever had. So we now have an EJ council coordinator. And so this was the first meeting of the council in 2023. And it was really more of like a get to know you meet and greet, because there's some new agencies that were added to that group. And so there are just two things that I wanted to mention to you all that I thought might be of interest from that meeting. The first is that as part of that House bill, it directed the state to create an environmental justice mapping tool, and that effort is now underway. So as it gets further along, I'll be sure to let you all know what is coming available and what's out there. It's not going to be released or ready for the public, I don't think, until 2025. So they've got a while to go, and they're just getting started with some of their work group efforts right now. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that the council members are very interested, and I guess historically they've done this, but in holding listening sessions around the state to get input from communities on environmental justice issues. And so I know that's going to be a priority for the council, identifying those locations and traveling to those places throughout the state over the next year or so. So as I know those locations, in case any of you would like to attend, if it comes to your area, I'll let you know and you can fit in. And they'll be having the listening sessions, and then they'll also likely be having their council meetings around the same time.
Thank you, Jesse. Okay, any questions for Jesse? All right, we'll move on to agenda item number 2. Next steps on OWEB board equity statement. Courtney and Eric.
All right, and let me know if I break up or stall, because I am having a little bit of computer issues this morning. Eric is gonna share his screen, but before we jump there, so just as a recap and a reminder, at our last committee meeting, we spent a bunch of time talking about definitions, so we could all get on the same page about what words we wanted to use in the equity statement, be consistent with the words. We also heard from all of you thinking about what words were important to highlight and call out, and maybe when we could split, when we could lump within our equity statement. So Eric and I took all of that feedback and also some of the, and put into context some of the feedback and conversations we had during the tribal training, tribal check-in that we had as a result of the report on barriers to tribes in our grant making. So we kind of took all that information. Eric and I worked and then ran the draft by the executive team. And so we have what I would say is a pretty good updated draft based on our last couple meetings and some follow-up to share with all of you today. So our thought today is we would spend, a good 20-30 minutes looking at the document, getting feedback from all of you, whether you think we're headed in the right direction, whether there's areas of concern, things that you really like, and then hear from you on next steps and where we should go from here on sharing it with the full board. So with that, I will see if there's any questions before Eric, or comments before Eric shares his screen. No, not seeing any. All right, Eric. Okay. So, Eric, why don't you scroll a little and see if we can get, we don't need the words background and the equity resolution. Scroll down just a little there. Yeah, I'm wondering if we can get everything. Maybe zoom out just a tiny bit. And if we can get all the whereas statements on the screen at the same time, and then look at that section first, and then we could move to the resolution section. One of these time was you all thought it was important to specifically identify and call out Indigenous communities. So you'll see that that is specifically called out, and we're more comfortable lumping other environmental justice communities together. And so you'll see that's a little bit of the balance in words that we found here. And tried to also, to the extent we could, simplify the language so it was easily readable by everybody. I think some words we also talked about it, ET, some words were just really important to continue to include, but we did try to simplify the language. So I guess I'll pause to see if anyone has any feedback, positive or negative comments on where we are right now.
I think Chris has his hand up right
Oh,
now.
thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Courtney. Going back to a couple of the terms that you just referenced here, indigenous communities and the other being environmental justice communities. I look back at the climate resolution, and I just wanted to point out some inconsistencies, and maybe that's totally fine with this resolution that we not be completely consistent. But I know in the climate resolution we use the term Native American tribes or tribal entities, and here we use indigenous. And then in the climate resolution, we also use the term impacted communities rather than environmental justice communities, and yet kind of define them the same way within the narrative. So just wanted to point that out and make certain we're okay with that inconsistency. And in terms of the use of indigenous communities versus Native American tribes, I definitely refer to Kelly on what is the most appropriate term there. So those are just a couple things that I noted in doing a little compare contrast between these two resolutions.
Thanks for pointing that out, Chris. And Eric, correct me if I'm wrong. We did look at both documents, and I believe we landed on the environmental justice communities partially because of some definitions came out through the state after the climate resolution was adopted. So between when that was adopted and when we began working on this, and so we pulled that language because it had been used in other documents by the state. Is that right, Eric?
Yeah, that's right. The House Bill 4077 that Jesse referred to a little bit ago included the environmental justice communities definition.
And then Kelly, what are your thoughts on the indigenous versus the tribal communities?
Yeah, thank you. So I guess I would ask the same question if the language that came out recently also now has changed to Indigenous versus Native American. I've noticed lately there's been a shift toward Indigenous as opposed to Native American. I am not the ultimate authority on which one is better to use. Just going to put that out there right now. So I think it depends. I think Indigenous communities has a bit of a broader context with things. And Native American communities can sometimes be more specific to Native American tribes. So I think it's really sort of up to us or how we want to be consistent with additional language that's being used by the state or potentially additional language that was used in the climate resolution, like Chris pointed out. So I think that's up for discussion.
I like how you laid that out, Kelly. I think using the way we're using it here is probably broader versus how we used it in the climate resolution if we just were specific to tribes. Thoughts from anybody?
This is Aaron Curtis. I can't find my hand, sorry. I'm not a Zoomer. I guess my initial take is broader is better. I mean, to keep it short and sweet, but if there's no reason that we would need to narrow it for, you know, a regulatory reason, why would we?
Liza Jane.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm going to expose my ignorance. In this whereas, can you help me with history of the disposition of indigenous communities other than Native Americans that we're addressing here?
I'm pondering here and trying to reflect back on our executive team discussion. And I am not remembering that we were specifically talking broader than our tribal communities. In one of the conversations we had, you know, kind of continuously back and forth at executive team was, are we talking about Oregon? Are we talking about the broader, you know, movement? Are we talking about OWEB? So trying to figure out like what in each whereas statement, who are we talking about? Are we talking about OWEB? Are we talking about Oregon? Are we talking about, you know, broader environmental movement? And so I would say as making the decision to use indigenous communities, we were probably at this point where we were thinking broader. But I also look for input from my fellow members or Eric or Lisa or Stephanie if they want to add to that.
Lisa has her hand up.
Darn it. There we go. I think I'm unmuted now. So I think we were thinking broader, and some of it, I think for me, came from the trip and the visit with Anahuac Farms, and thinking about some of the indigenous practices that they have brought to that farm to connect people here in Oregon from the different regions, specifically in Mexico and South America, even to certain varieties of corn that are very different than what we have here and are only grown in certain regions of those countries. And they're actually trying to incorporate and produce some of the seeds so that the people have access to their indigenous food. So I think I've started to think about some of these things in just a broader context, maybe than we were thinking 2 years ago.
Thanks, Lisa. Let's see, I think, was it Aaron or Chris? Which one of you had your hand up first? Okay, I'll go with Chris first.
Sorry, Aaron had his hand up first.
Oh, okay,
It doesn't
Aaron.
matter to me. Hi, Aaron Curtis. Well, I guess just maybe to react a little or share what my interpretation of that clause that Liza Jane was asking about. I guess I read the subsequent exclusion of non-white and less wealthy people from land ownership and management decisions. I interpreted that as our initial state constitution, right? That prevented a lot of minority groups from owning land and recognizing that history of the state. But that was just, which I thought was a positive thing to recognize for sure. But that was my interpretation of it.
Thanks, Aaron. Chris, and then I'll get to you, Bruce.
Yeah, some of the same here, but just maybe my interpretation too. And it also references the whereas bullet right immediately following, which I think that one where we call out indigenous communities and reference unique relationship with native fish, wildlife species, et cetera. For me, that really speaks to our tribal communities. And yet we use the same term indigenous communities in the whereas above that. But for me, in that whereas, I feel like we're speaking to a broader set of minorities, where maybe that I guess this is some of the challenges of using a term like indigenous that is broad. It kind of cuts both ways. You know, in that whereas maybe maybe we could consider using that term environmental justice communities or impacted communities, which is a little more definitive in terms of its broad use. So I don't know. Yeah, I think that whereas can be a little confusing when we use the same term below, where we're more specifically referencing our tribal communities, I think.
Thanks, Chris. I think that's a good point. Bruce had his hand up.
Yeah, I like that point as well, Chris. One of the things I'd request as we are working on these on the statement is that we put draft on every all these iterations as we move forward, and it's only important that if people look at it and don't see the word draft, they can react that it's fait accompli and that we've already acted on it. So that's just a suggestion moving forward. And if we're going to put it in the website, we need to make sure that it is titled draft. I'm not sure, following up on what Chris and Aaron were saying, I'm not sure that we need the word indigenous in that first whereas. Oregon acknowledges the disposition of communities or of some, it's further, it's broader than just indigenous. We make no mention of the history of redlining, of all of the race issues that Oregon has had. So if we talk about disposition of communities and then address specifically the tribal or slash indigenous communities in the second whereas, I think it would be more inclusive and also maybe more clear.
Thanks, Bruce. So I think everyone brings up really good points here. This is a tricky one because each individual person is going to have a preference for whether they refer to themselves as Indigenous or Native American. And so it's more of a, it can be more of a personal choice for things. So I think with this, we want to be, I mean, the idea is we want to be as inclusive as possible, right? And so what we could do as well, just to keep it broad, but also recognize specifically Native American tribal communities within OWEB's area is, I believe it was maybe, I can't remember if it was Chris or Aaron now, said maybe we keep Indigenous in in that first whereas, and then the unique relationship with Oregon's native fish and wildlife species, instead of saying maybe Indigenous communities there, we could say Native American tribal communities there and get a little more specific, but also keep it broad with recognizing Indigenous communities in the broader sense with this. So I don't know, Bruce, if you have some feelings on that one.
Well, thanks. there's a phrase that was used in one of our earlier meetings, or maybe more than one, that was, to me, foundational for the work we're doing and why we're doing it as OWEB. It was that everyone in Oregon lives in a watershed. So the point is, our work as OWEB board, spending money, restoration money across the state, we need to be looking at communities as well as the environment. We need to be looking at everyone living in a watershed. So I'm following up, I think, on what Aaron was saying, keeping it as broad as possible. I like the idea of the tribal knowledge, traditional indigenous knowledge, making that very clear. But that the phrase where we used indigenous, the whereas on disposition or dispossession, but also barriers of ownership. Certainly the race, religion, there are a variety of communities that live in Oregon watersheds that we want to consider as are leveling the playing field. So I would like to make sure that if we're going to use indigenous, we add an additional somehow descriptor that will allow us to include all of the communities that are in Oregon.
Great point, Bruce. Thank you. I see Liza Jane has her hand up.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm still struggling with this whole part, and I think that we're talking about I'm wondering what the intention of this sentence is in the whole whereas. I might be missing that. I'm also thinking about how it's received by the people in Oregon, especially landowners that we work with. It's really wonky to me. And then I want to add the next one. I really like that. And I'm wondering if we can switch it to a more positive statement. I think that we have OWEB can do better, and we're working at it. We're taking action on equity, diversity, inclusion. But to say that we're not historically been incorporated into our decision-making process, I think is pretty harsh. I don't know why we had to say that either here. So just looking for understanding and clarity on those two. The intention of the one ahead, and is it possible to make the second one not as harsh for OWEB?
So I can jump in. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Oh, I guess I was just, I agree with you, Liza Jane, and was just going to offer up that whereas could be concluded by a statement such as, in their perspective, warrants full inclusion into OWEB's decision-making process without referencing to what degree they've been incorporated in that process in the past. So I agree with Liza Jane on that.
Thanks for the wording suggestion.
Aaron?
Hi. Well, I guess my take on that is, I mean, it's really, I think, OWEB is a government entity, and we're recognizing that there have been, when it comes to, land management, land dispossession, there has been systematic racism at play, right? And that's kind of the point of where we're at, or of why we're doing a lot of this now, right? Of just recognizing it. I don't think, I hear you loud and clear that we need to choose our words carefully, right? But I guess I don't read this as blaming, individuals who are out there farming today. You know what I mean? It's just a recognition of our history, of how we got to where we are today.
This is Liza Jean. Thank you, Erin. That's helpful. We recognize above, and maybe that's the word, acknowledging. Yeah, I guess I honestly hung up on less wealthy people from land ownership because there's a stereotype and a myth currently that if you own land and potentially producing products from it, that you must be wealthy. And for the majority, there's nothing farther from the truth. And so that, because that comes up for me a lot, I think honestly, I just hung up on that and I thought, what purpose is that? But Erin, you've helped me understand that. It might be
well, what if there was the word historic in front of dispossession? Do you think, I think that gives it more context of what we're talking about to begin with.
You're right. That's what I'm hearing you say throughout. And that is, for me, more helpful. Yeah.
Thanks, Eric, for being our track changes person.
Lisa?
Thank you, and thank you for the conversation. Now I'm wondering if Indigenous is the right modifier to communities, because it could be Asian communities, given some history from World War II. It could be, I'm sure there are others than Indigenous to the Americas. And so I think back to Bruce's comment about communities, are we better having this be broader, saying communities, and then narrowing it down in that next whereas? I think we had BIPOC in here at one point too, and we've gone back and forth with BIPOC in, BIPOC out, because people have different reactions to BIPOC as well. So trying to think about it in terms of, how people receive it and what it feels like for them.
So we've got lots of great feedback on this first part now. Do we want to scroll down and look at the second part?
Sure.
Kelly, I'm not able to hold my hand up except on screens. Before we start on that, I'd like to ask a process question. There are a variety of comments and notes that I've taken on this latest iteration. For instance, in the 12/7, the December 7th draft, we had a whereas that recognize that diversity, equity, inclusion, environmental justice must be front and center for all our board decisions, policy making, and budgeting processes, as these are integral to the protection and long-term sustainability of our ecosystems, wildlife populations, and communities. I really like that better than what we've ended up in this latest draft. And this process of going through the current draft and wordsmithing on that or making suggestions, to me is a little awkward as far as being able to, first off, we only got it a few days ago, but then being able to go back, make notes and distribute them so everybody has a chance to see suggestions, edits. I don't know how you want to do how you're moving forward today, but I'd hate to lose the opportunity to weigh in and to hear other people and to read what other people would like to see, what they'd like to retain from earlier drafts, what they like about the current draft, what they don't like. I mean, so just my comment on it.
Thanks for that feedback, Bruce. So process wise, I think we wanted to, once we talked about these today, and it's great to get that feedback on the language from the previous version. We wanted to hear from the whole committee about what folks felt like we should do for next steps. And happy to send out, a track changes of a previous version for folks to look at, but we've been trying along the way just to hear folks' feedback at each committee meeting, to take executive team feedback, and kind of Eric and I have massaged it along the way based on the collective feedback.
Well, my only comment on that,
Meetings with comments. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, Courtney, I understand that. There is a difference that by moving it back into the staff work, which is, you guys do a lot of work on this, but the work looking at the climate resolution, that was largely drafted by the committee and so this is a little different process, moving everything back in and asking you guys with your workload to interpret what you've heard. So without being able to just, I don't know, to communicate within the committee, posting, sending out the comments, like I'd love to hear a compilation of Aaron's comments and Chris's comments and like every member of the committee, rather than have them come in being distilled and come back out. So that's the process issue that I think is different than what we did on climate.
I'm here. I just have my video off because I was having internet connectivity issues. So I guess I would ask
So Courtney, you're still having internet.
committee what you would okay, go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You're still having connectivity issues because we're getting, the long drawn sounds. So thank you for your comments, Bruce. And I think Courtney was going to say, how would the committee like to take this? I mean, would the committee like to go ahead and we can put draft on this latest version and provide the version from back in December, January timeframe when we worked on it. So you have both of them. And you all could either, it's hard to do it in track changes, I'm afraid, but maybe provide some comments back in an email that we could share amongst the committee so that you all can do a little bit of group think around it, and we would have a record of it, and then try and make some edits. Oh, Eric may have a process idea. Perfect.
Yeah, thanks. In the past, I believe with some of the committee work, we've used like a Google Doc. And so all the committee members can have comments on one document, and you can see kind of in real time as those are being developed.
So Eric, we need to see if in the enterprise we can use Google Docs. There had been issues with that in terms of security in the past, so we just need to double check on that.
Okay.
Are there other thoughts from other committee members on doing something like a Google Doc or providing comments on a draft that way? I personally feel like that would be helpful because we only meet so often as a committee, and I feel like every time we meet, we have some substantial edits, and then we come back and we spend another 30 minutes on it, and it's like a 30-minute chunk here and there, and it might actually help the process along a bit. So those are my thoughts. Liza Jane.
Yeah, Bruce and Kelly, I would love that. Because these are big issues. There's a lot to talk about and learn about, and it's so important. I really treasure the opportunity to have this group and their minds and experience and get something that means a lot to OWEB and the state. And it's not just this is great. And Courtney and Eric and everyone who works on it, this is so hard, and listening and trying to get it other people's thoughts and words down. Huge amount of work. I just feel like there's still more work to do. And if it was possible for people to commit some time to a Google Doc and kind of get after it. And I wish there was some time in our July meeting where in person we could kind of have an hour of further conversation would be really valuable too. So lots of support for continued work on a draft in whatever format we can.
Thanks, Liza Jane. Chris?
Yeah, just offering my support for this approach we're discussing. I think it's a good idea.
Okay.
So hearing all that support, I think we will find some medium to use to get some feedback that collective, so you all can look at it. And Eric and Courtney, I'm sure, can figure something out. You said something interesting, and that is some time in person. We have a pretty busy schedule for the July board meeting, but if the members of this committee wanted to commit to time earlier before the tour on Monday, because we have the tour planned for Monday afternoon, we could talk about getting together pre-tour. We could talk about an hour or so as the board meeting concludes on Wednesday. It's a matter of time commitment and travel, trying to be respectful of the travel time it's going to take for people, and getting them home at a decent time, and not having you have to leave at dark 30 either. So I put that out there as an option, that we will definitely accommodate the wishes of the committee. We just need to know which way you would like to go, and help us to navigate it so it's not too much burden on you.
Lisa, what happens after the tour on Monday?
So there's a dinner with the
Okay.
board on Monday. There there was an offer came in yesterday for a presentation on sage grouse, like right after the dinner, much like we did in April, in conjunction with the board dinner. But if post dinner people would like to meet, we could post a committee meeting and do it then. I think there's an incredible amount of excitement around the board being out again. And the schedules fill up so quickly with the offers for tours and presentations, and then trying to balance it with the body of work that we have for all at each of these meetings in terms of your grant work, and balancing the time in what we're trying to do in a day and a half, basically.
Yeah.
It's getting to be more and more of a challenge.
What about Tuesday night, since we don't have a board dinner? Is there an open spot there?
So the plan is for Tuesday, we're doing a reception, a local reception, longer time frame with heavy hors d'oeuvres rather than a dinner. If the board feels like after working all day and doing a reception for a couple of hours that they want to come back, the committee wants to come back together. Again, we will figure out how to accommodate it. I'm just trying to be cognizant of the amount of work and the brain space that it takes to shift gears throughout the day with all that we're asking and trying to get done.
Yeah.
What time does the tour start on Monday?
Eric Hartstein, can you look at the draft agenda? You could get to it probably quicker than I can.
If I was on VPN, I probably could.
It's at 2.
2.
Okay.
Is there somewhere that we could, so if the tour starts at 2, we're all meeting somewhere to drive to the tour, right? Is there somewhere that we could meet ahead of the tour from 1 to 2 or something like that? Because I would hate to try to take anything away from what we have Tuesday night or Wednesday. It feels like maybe ahead of the start of the meeting would be good. And also, I think it's a good point. Our brains may be a little fresher then too.
So Nicole, you've been working on the logistics. Do you have a space for Monday, or we can go see what we could find in terms of a space?
Yeah, we're meeting in Sisters, so I'm sure we could find something there for sure.
I would assume we would be able to meet in the space we're going to have the meeting. I know there'll be setup going on. I'm sure we could sit in a corner wherever the meeting's going to be held.
On Monday, I'll have to get permission ahead of time.
Right.
So that's definitely
Okay.
something I can investigate.
Yeah. And there may be, let's see if there's a meeting room at the hotel. That might be another option. We will figure out the logistics of finding a space. If the committee would like to meet pre-tour on Monday. I'm trying to keep my days straight.
Chris, go ahead. You have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to express support for your idea, Kelly. I think the other options that we discussed would impact our existing schedule. And I like you said, I think we'd be more productive meeting ahead of our meeting, maybe over lunch that day, if we can find a venue or a location. So I like that idea.
Okay. Could we do this, because in the interest of time and moving our agenda along, can I just get a show of hands, either like this or with the button, from board members for meeting on Monday ahead of the tour maybe I like the idea of a lunch meeting. That sounds great. That way nobody's hangry, just getting into town too. So can I just see, okay, so, okay,
We're on it.
that looks unanimous from the folks that are here. So perfect. Thank
We're
you
on
all.
it. We'll take care of it.
Yeah,
Awesome.
so Kelly, Eric and I will figure out how to share the document with the board and figure out logistics, and we'll get that to everybody.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay. Great conversation, everybody, and I really appreciate everyone's enthusiasm and willingness to commit to this and continue the conversation, and do want to acknowledge all the work that OWEB staff has done on this. And hopefully you understand that it isn't because you guys aren't doing a great job on this. I just think we need more conversation because, as Liza Jane said, this is big. So thank you. Okay, let's move on to our next agenda item, an update on the draft DEI action plan, part of the governor's expectation. So this is Courtney and Lisa.
Thank you for that. So you all may remember, and we talked about it when Governor Kotek came into office. She provided agencies with a list of 9 expectations. One of the expectations is that agencies adopt a DEI action plan. We worked on an action plan here for the agency in terms of things that we've been doing that met some of the SMART goals. As the time for that crept up on all state agencies, I think there was a recognition that we didn't have a template early. It came out much later, and concerned about having public involvement and feedback. And so what OWEB was able to do was submit a plan for a plan to say, here's what we're thinking. We will have a plan to incorporate into OWEB's strategic plan, which we have to work on over the next year to update and incorporate DEI goals, SMART goals in that larger plan. And I think that's generally the direction right now that all state agencies are going, is to try and get one larger plan with measurable goals in it, so that we can capture that. And there is a way for the governor to track progress on a lot of different operational aspects of state government that we haven't had in the past. So ultimately, we met our June 1st deadline that we had with the governor, and plan would bring those SMART goals back as we start the conversation with Steve Patty in our July board meeting, and scheduling out the work that we need to do over the next year to update the current strategic plan for the future. Court, do you want to add to that?
The only thing I would add is that we did have the OWEB staff DEI team provide feedback on what we drafted. Executive team had a chance to provide feedback on what we drafted, and then just really looking forward to then incorporating all of this work into our strategic planning process, which will include board input as well as stakeholder input. So it feels weird to have turned it in without getting feedback from this group of the board, but we did have to meet that deadline and have a plan for getting feedback through the strategic plan process.
And I think that's the beauty of the plan for the plan, is we're thinking about it. One of the things that's in those SMART goals is that we develop the equity statement and complete it along the way. And so it laid out the intent for us to move this forward, and that met our June 1st requirement.
Thank you, Lisa. Any questions for Lisa on that?
I would just say the work that we've done with this committee over the last year was really helpful for all of us in thinking about how to approach equity work and what SMART goals would be for us. And it's really capturing much of what you have asked us as a staff to do. The reaching out and meeting new partners and making connections, working on the equity statement. Those are things that not all agencies are doing right now. And so it gave us a leg up, but we had to put it down in writing.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's move on to our next agenda item, which is an update on the tribal training. And I'm not sure
Yes,
who... Courtney, okay.
I'm giving it. Ken's son is graduating high school this week, so he is otherwise occupied today with lots of family in town. So we just wanted to, continue to address this topic and share where we are with this committee. So we did have the gathering of our tribal applicants. So we had 7 tribes attend and multiple staff attended from the Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs. We did not have any participants from Burns Paiute, CT Clusie, or the Nez Perce tribe. And then we had a collection of OWEB staff that also attended the training. And again, this was really focused on breaking down the barriers for tribes to attend, to apply for our grants, understanding some of their concerns, trying to clarify specific things that were called out in the assessment that were challenges or barriers. We had a great conversation. We were really able to have a dialogue with the folks that showed up and provide some follow-up afterwards for some specific follow-up topics. Next steps is we didn't want to have OWEB staff outnumber our tribal partners at this training. So we plan on circling back with grant program staff just to hit some of the highlights from the training to make sure that our grant management staff as well as our review teams are aware of some of the maybe misperceptions or topics that we discussed. And then Ken and I and executive team will continue to look through the other areas that were identified in the assessment and continue to think about how we can reach out and engage with our tribal partners to reduce barriers to apply for grants. And I just also want to share with this committee, we highlighted this report in our application for our Pacific Coast Salmon Recovery Funds and the training that we had planned with tribes and how we were trying to reduce barriers. And when we got our phone call to let us know how much we had received from our PCSRF application, the reviewer specifically called out, they appreciated the work OWEB was doing to both identify the barriers for tribes to apply for grants and to break down those barriers. So that was great feedback to get from our federal funder.
Lisa.
And I would just share with the board and, just give kudos to Courtney for her work on the PCSRF application. We had an all-time high in terms of our award at $20.2 million this round. And the DEI work, tribal work, and then Klamath, and talking about how we could incorporate the Klamath work into PCSRF funding was called out specifically in the conversation. So, everybody, 20.2 million is a huge award, one. And I think, it really acknowledges the great work that's going on and the thoughtful process that we're all going through as we're doing this work was acknowledged by NOAA. So Courtney, publicly thank you for putting together a beast of an application and really thinking about how we leverage the work that the board has committed to and what we're doing across the state in terms of restoration.
Thanks, Lisa.
That is, that's fantastic. I'm really happy to hear that. And I look forward to maybe, Courtney, at the meeting this summer, we can talk a little more PCSRF.
Yeah, and actually, Kelly, yeah, I have a couple of follow-up items on PCSRF. So maybe even you and I can find a time to chat on the phone in the next few weeks.
That sounds great. Okay, any questions on the tribal training? Okay, so we are now moving on to public.
Liza
Oh,
Jane.
wait.
Liza Jane has her
Oh,
arm
Liza
up.
Jane. I'm so sorry, Liza Jane. There's like a
Okay.
light in the corner and I
Oh.
can't see your hand and I'm sorry. It's happened
That's
multiple
okay.
times.
I can do this too. Kelly.
That's what I need this morning. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, me too. Courtney and great work. Do we have what you learned about the specific barriers for applying for grants? Does this committee have that information?
So Ken did give a presentation to this committee a couple
Okay.
meetings ago. I can't
Yep.
remember which one. And he did go through that, but
Yep.
I would be happy to send out that PowerPoint if you would like to see it. But we are continuously checking in on that and thinking about next steps. I mean, big kudos to Ken. Ken is a fabulous tribal liaison and keeps it in the forefront of our conversations consistently. And he actually scolded me in the email that we shouldn't be talking about this as a tribal training, but tribal engagement and continuous improvement about how we're engaging with our tribal partners. So he asked me to correct that in future DEI agendas. So I appreciate Ken and that. So I think, you know, in my mind, we're just going to continuously be thinking about that. We're also thinking about in our staff committee, what are the words we should be using? Indigenous, tribal partners, how we are engaging. So just lots to think about. And I think what Ken and I would like to do is continue to bring these topics to this committee, recognizing, and I have to say that since Ken's not here, is our engagement with our tribal partners is not truly DEI work necessarily as you would frame it up, because we have a government to government relationship and responsibility with our tribes, but we want to make sure that we keep that as a forefront of our conversations. And so this is the best place to keep that in forefront of those conversations. But I want to keep bringing up this tribal engagement and keep it on this committee's agenda as Ken and I and the executive team continue to think about how do we address the things that came up in the tribal assessment report.
That's great, Courtney. I was hearing that you learned more in the experience with that you did, and I want to make sure this committee continues to get that. Ken's presentation was awesome. It always is, but I want to just keep hearing what these barriers are so that when we're drafting resolution statements that they're appropriate and will actually create change. So that's what I was asking. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Liza Jane. And we will definitely keep bringing more information to this committee.
Thanks, Liza Jane, and thank you, Courtney. Yeah, I think between the tribal assessment report and the tribal engagement session that was held, see, we're quick learners. I think we'll continue to learn, and the continued engagement, and I know Ken does a great job with this. I think the continued engagement with tribes as we move forward and we start to break down some of these barriers or find the solutions to the barriers, I think it's going to be really informative for us. So yeah, I'm happy that it's a part of the DEI committee. I think that's the most appropriate place for it to be, but also thank you for recognizing the government to government relationship. I appreciate that too. Okay, let's move on to our next agenda item, which is public comment. So I want to acknowledge that we did receive 2 written public comments. Those were provided to us ahead of the meeting. And it doesn't sound like we have anyone signed up for verbal public comment, but I will just check in with Nicole on that one more time to make sure we didn't get anybody that signed up last minute.
That is correct. No one has signed up as far as I'm aware.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. So again, thank you for engaging. Thank you for submitting comments. Okay.
Kelly,
Looking for agenda items for the next meeting is our last topic, but
Thank
Bruce
you.
has his hand up.
Okay, Bruce, go for
Kelly,
it.
how do we? What is the process for responding to public comments?
Great question, Bruce. I'm going to look to staff on that one.
So Eric, jump in if I miss anything, but Bruce, when someone submits written public comment for either a committee meeting or for a board meeting, we acknowledge that we've received it. But typically we do not do a written response. We just acknowledge that we've received it. But Eric or Lisa, you want to add anything? I see head nods.
No, that's correct, Courtney. We make sure the board is aware of it. I think we are continuing to look at public comments and looking at how we continue to improve here at OWEB based on what we're hearing and providing that feedback to the board. I think listening in terms of some of the concerns that come along and trying to identify paths forward. But there is not a written acknowledgement back to people, Bruce.
Okay, thank you.
And then again, just a process check, those written comments become a part of the record. So they're a part of the record.
That's correct. They are a part of the record.
Okay, great. Okay, so our last agenda item is topics for the next meeting. So we have a couple on here already. Update on outreach to new partners. That's one of our standing topics. And then continued discussion of the OWEB board equity statement. Is there anything else that our board members would like to hear about as far as topics for the next meeting?
And Kelly, and I just clarify for the public that this committee will meet again and it will be noticed and publicly streamed on Monday, July 24th, and we will just discuss the equity statement at that time. And then, so this agenda that we're talking about will be for our September meeting before the October board meeting.
Thank you for that clarification, Courtney. I appreciate that.
Kelly, the nexus between DEI and environmental justice with water and climate committee and the RAC, I don't know if by that time we'll be pretty, I think, close to finished with RAC, and I don't know if you want to report on the DEI implications, if any, with the RAC changes or the rule changes and a report from climate. We have a climate meeting, water and climate meeting next week, I think on Wednesday. So if you'd like a short report on that, let us know.
Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, I think that gets to just a point that we've had about just updates from other committees kind of in general at each of the other committee meetings, since we have, you know, folks that sit on multiple committees, right? So I think that would be good to add to the next agenda. And then I saw 3 hands go up and I don't know who's went up first. I'm gonna go Liza Jane. Okay,
I just want to make sure that that Google Doc or whatever format that we're all communicating on is going to happen before July 24th. Okay, great.
thanks.
We will
Liza.
get on it.
Thanks, Liza Jane. Okay, Lisa.
So one of the things I might suggest is, as we're working on the strategic plan and we need to have the DEI plan, maybe some discussion with this committee around the SMART goals going forward and what we're thinking about, because they tend to be, they're more operational in nature than they are policy. But there is a strong nexus with the work that we do here. And I think some outside eyes and some outside thinking around that with some specific attention to it may be very helpful.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I have one more. I like just having a tribal update, just making space for a tribal engagement update at these meetings. I think it's good to have that as a standing meeting item as well. And if they're, if it's just we're still working on things or we're still analyzing reports or we're doing outreach, it can just be a quick update as well. So I'll suggest that one.
And the other thing I would ask this group is, would you like a standing item also for Jesse to update us on the EJ Council? And if there's something to update, great. If there's not, then, but at least we don't forget it and lose track of that opportunity to engage and learn.
I was seeing some head nods, so I think yes on that one.
Okay. Great. That's a nice list for our next meeting.
I think so, yes. Okay.
And I just want to thank everybody for the amazing engagement on the equity statement. Neither Eric nor I take, and I'm speaking for Eric, like, we love that you guys want to dive into this. We literally get together, do a bunch of work and think, oh gosh, this needs more work. Wish we had more time. So I'm super excited that you all want to jump in and work on it. And we are not offended in the least.
Yeah, I would echo that. I really appreciate it. I think in this last round, we went with it, at least I went with an eye to some of the things that Liza Jane mentioned, trying to think about how to be inclusive in the language, how to get the point across, but not be offensive, because Oregon is incredibly diverse and this is hard and challenging work. Just, appreciate the engagement and, Chris, your idea of spinning it up to something more positive. Thank you. That's very helpful, because I think with some of the places that I've seen these things start, they aren't necessarily spun up to the positive piece of it. And we can all do better going forward. And I think that's the goal. And why we have this at the center of our work is we all want to do better going forward.
That was largely Liza Jane's idea, but I just supported it. Gave some ideas behind it.
I think we could all use more positivity in our lives, right? Okay, so I'm just gonna ask for anything additional from committee members for the good of the order before we adjourn today.
We were, Kelly, they tell us that we should read the handwriting on the wall. And in my particular case, in this motel room in Maupin, it says on the wall, in 1900, the Oregonian claimed Shaniko was destined to be the largest wool market in the world. In 1930, it was sold for taxes at auction. And in 1959, Shaniko was named Oregon's Ghost Town of the Year. That's what it says on my wall.
That's great, Bruce. A little bit of Oregon history. I like it. All right. Well, thank you everyone for your time today. I really appreciate it. And we will see you all at the next committee meeting.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thanks,
Have a
everybody.
good
Bye,
day.
everyone.